Hello, I'm Nafis Ali, and today we will be discussing about the history of the MBTA Orange Line. I will be discussing about the stations, previous stops, and extensions, and the fleet which is used. So tune in. Now, the Orange Line originally opened in June 10th of 1901, which was called the Boston Elevated Railway. This is because this was an elevated rapid transit system which started from Sullivan Square Terminal, went down the Charlestown Elevated above Main Street, making stops at Thompson Square, which opened in 1902, City Square, then crossing the Charles River above Elevated, then making a stop at North Station, connecting to the Green Line. Then the line split off to two directions, which I will dive into right now. Now, there was a direction which the line split off right onto the Bay of Boston on Atlantic Ave, where the line went elevated, making stops at Battery Street, Rose Wharf, Atlantic Avenue, South Station, Beach Street, then connecting to the Washington Street Elevated, where the Washington Street Elevated ran above Washington Street, where making stops at Dover Street, Northampton Street, and terminating at Dudley Square Terminal. The second direction was that the Boston Elevated Railway used the Tremont Street subway, where the elevated tracks connected to the Green Line tracks. At the time, it was called the Tremont Street subway at Canal Street Incline. Half of the tunnel was occupied by heavy rail trains, while the other half was occupied by streetcars. Now, trains exited from the Pleasant Street Incline, which was constructed for streetcars but temporarily used for the Boston Elevated Railway to connect to the Washington Street Elevated. Now, this was temporarily because the T at the time was still constructing the Washington Street subway built underneath Washington Street in downtown Boston. The Tremont Street subway was used until 1908, when it was returned back to streetcar use, or rather the present-day Green Line. So with this, the tunnel opened in 1908, making stops at Union Friend, which is now Haymarket, Milk Devonshire Streets, which is now State Street, Summer Winter Street, which was later renamed to Summer Washington, then simplified to Washington, then finally renamed to Downtown Crossing. Boylston, which was later renamed to Boylston, Essex, then simplified to Essex, then renamed to Chinatown that we know today. Then which connected to the Washington Street Elevated. Following the year of 1909, the line was extended from Dudley Square to Eccleston Green Street, which opened in 1912, and terminating at Forest Hills. Now, south of Forest Hills, trains could be stored at Forest Hills Yard, and trains at the time were powered by spring battery electric at Eccleston Powerhouse. Trains were stored, maintained, repaired if they broke down, and general maintenance was done at the Sullivan Square Maintenance Facility Yard during that time. In 1919, the line was extended one stop from Sullivan Square, crossing the Mystic River, trains now terminating at Everett. Also, trains could also be parked at Everett Yard for layover, and another maintenance facility yard was opened next to Everett. Trains can now be maintained, repaired, fixed at Everett Mechanical Shops. In July 22nd, 1928, an accident occurred on the Atlantic Avenue elevated between Beach Street and South Station. A northbound train derailed, which killed 2 passengers, in which this was a major destruction. So with this, train service was all terminated at South Station and Beach Street ended up being closed. Now in 1926, a report stated that they wanted to create a highway along Atlantic Ave. So with this, the Atlantic Avenue elevated closed in September 30th of 1938. The elevator was there, but later was torn down in 1942 for metal and scrap parts for World War II. In 1947, the BER became the Metropolitan Transit Authority, or MTA, although this was later changed to Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, or MBTA, in 1964. So with this, the Boston Elevated Railway was renamed to the Orange Line because the color orange was chosen because the elevated ran on Washington Street, which was formerly known as Orange Street. Now, the Charlestown elevated at the time was a bit in a difficult timing. Now, this elevator was built by the Harbor of Boston, in which in this case the elevated suffered from salty air, acid rain, and it became very risky to be in operation. Also, neighboring on Main Street didn't like having an elevated because an elevated blocked sunlight, cast dark shadows, and create a lot of noise. So with this, the T had to reroute the system. The T in the 1970s extended the Orange Line north from Haymarket, starting a new tunnel from north of Haymarket. The line was extended to North Station, which was an underground stop. Then the line was extended, crossing the Charles River underground, entering surface level side by side with the Haverhill Line underneath the highway, which the line made stops to Community College, Sullivan Square, then crossing over the Mystic River, making a stop at Wellington. Now, Wellington, the T opened a new maintenance facility yard next to Wellington Station, which trains are from now on stored, maintained, repaired, and general maintenance is done at Wellington Car House. Wellington Car House replaced old Sullivan Square shops and Everett shops. Well, trains could still be repaired for heavy maintenance at Everett, but basic maintenance is done at Wellington from now on. And to Malden Center. The Charlestown elevated closed on April 4th of 1975 and was completely torn down by 1976. The Haymarket North Extension was opened to the public on April 7th of 1975. In 1977, it was extended one stop to its present set terminal at Oak Grove. Now, in the 1940s through the 1970s, the state of Massachusetts planned to construct a highway along the empty lines of the Southwest Corridor, which would start from Back Bay and go all the way to Route 128, which would be called the I-95. Although the people of Boston didn't want a highway to be built there because it would create a racial division between the neighborhoods in Boston. And after 9 years of protesting, the plan was canceled in 1973. So with this, the Urban Mass Transit Administration took the land and decided to construct a space for the commuter rail and Amtrak. Now, on the other hand, people started to hate the Washington Street Elevated because it was very loud, noisy, cast dark shadows on the road, and just blocked a lot of sunlight. So with this, the T had to do something with the Elevated. So with this, they had the idea of putting the orange line next to the commuter rail and Amtrak. So with this, the cross workforce began constructing the Southwest Corridor. So with this, a total of 250 skilled craftsmen, including 60 carpenters, 50 iron workers, 40 laborers, and 30 operating engineers, were used to construct the Southwest Corridor, which this was fully complete by 1987. On April 30th, 1987, the Orange Line train made the last trip on the Washington Street Elevated. Since then, the Elevated was closed to the public and was fully demolished by 1989. So with this, a total of 100 shuttle buses began to operate as the closure of the Elevated, and this later stopped in May 4th of 1987 when the new Southwest Corridor opened to the public for their new ways of getting around in Boston. The new stations which were added were New England Medical Center, which is now Tufts Medical Center, Back Bay South End, which it provided connection with the commuter rail and Amtrak, Massachusetts Avenue, then Ruggles, which were provided connection with the commuter rail, Roxbury Crossing, Jackson Square, Stony Brook, Green Street, and finally terminating at the present set terminal at Forest Hills. Also, trains could be stored at Forest Hills Yard for layover purposes. Now, from 2013 to 2014, the construction of a new station began, trains now stopping at Assembly, which was added between Wellington and Sullivan Square. Now, this sums up the history. Now, let's focus on the rolling stock, which is used. Now, the beginning of the Boston Elevated Railway, the train cars were 46 feet long, 8 degrees wide, 12 feet tall, and weighed 67,602 pounds. These cars have AMLE braking system with CP28 compressor, which contained 44 seats, which had the C60 model. Now, trains at the time were powered from Eggleston Square Powerhouse from 1909 to 1987 by alternating current and direct current on the Elevated. The BER purchased 33 cars numbered 01 to 033 from Wason, built in 1899, with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1928, following by with 45 additional cars built by St. Louis Car Company numbered 034 to 078, built in 1899 with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1928. Also, 22 cars built by Oswald Bradley numbered 079 to 0100, built in 1899 with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1928. Also, 50 cars from Wason numbered 0101 to 0150, built in 1903, General Electric Motors retired from service in 1928. Following by St. Louis Car Company again, 24 cars numbered 0151 to 0174, built in 1904 with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1928. Also, 45 cars numbered 0175 to 0219, built by Press Steel Company in 1906 with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1933. Car number 0210 got preserved to the Seashore Trolley Museum in 1994. 20 more cars were purchased by Press Steel Company numbered 0220 to 0239 in 1911 with General Electric Motors retired from service in 1933. 25 cars were purchased from ACF numbered 0240 to 0264, built in 1914, equipped with Westinghouse Electric retired from service in 1957, following by 30 cars from Press Steel Company, again numbered 0265 to 0294, built in 1914, equipped with Westinghouse Electric, retired from service in 1957. Again from Press Steel Company, 42 cars numbered 0295 to 0336, built in 1917, General Electrical Motors retired from service in 1958. Again, finally, 65 cars numbered 0337 to 0401, built in 1921 with Westinghouse Electrical retired from service in 1958. Now the T from 1927 to 1928 purchased 100 cars from Laconia Car Company and Wason, which are called the 900 series, numbered 0901 to 010,000. These cars are 46 feet long, 8 degrees wide, 12 feet tall, weighed 73,358 pounds. These cars have 44 seats, PC-10 control systems, AMLE braking systems, and CP28 compressor. These cars are equipped with Westinghouse and General Electric motors. These remained in service until 1962. Cars numbered 0986, 0996, 0997, and 010,000 was preserved to the Seashore Trolley Museum in Keenbunkport, Maine. Now, the T from 1957 to 1958 purchased 100 cars built by Pullman Standard. These cars are known as the 1100 series, which are numbered 01100 to 01199. These cars are 55 feet long, 9 degrees wide, 11 feet tall, weighed 57,540 pounds. These have 46 seats, General Electric motors, SMEE brakes, with 3 pairs of sliding doors each side, and these were designed of a classic subway car. Now, the 1100 series came in many different fonts. Now the first fonts that we have is the bright orange blossom on the bottom half, white on the top half, and a gray silver roof. Now an interesting font we have is here of gray on the bottom, white on the top half, and yellowish oranges doors, which makes it very different from the other cars. Now we also have this tone of gray on the front and rear ends of the car, in which these colors make these cars unique and very interesting to see them in many colors at the time. Now, these cars remained in this paint scheme until the 1970s. These were all later repainted to the classic tone that we know today. Now, the T was okay with the 1100 series until the early 1970s. Now, the T required a lot of work motor equipment for the Orange Line as part of the Southwest Corridor project, which would carry cement, bricks, mortar, and all that. Also, maintenance work equipment was required for the Red Line as part of the Alewife and Braintree extension. Also, many cars have derailed on the Charlestown Elevated and have been placed out of service, in which these placed a huge limitation of cars required for service. Now, the 1100 series didn't have Ridwell signs, in which case people couldn't tell if this train was going all the way to Everett, because some trains terminated at Sullivan Square rather than going to Everett. In which is the T just decided to replace the 1100s with a newer fleet. The T issued to the Hawker Siddeley Canada in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, to purchase 120 cars for the Orange Line in 1973 to replace the 1100 series. So with this, the T acquired the number 12 main line and signed an agreement with Hawker Siddeley Canada in August 19th of 1976. These cars were tested at the Transportation Center in Pueblo, Colorado. These cars were manufactured from 1979 to 1981, and the first cars arrived at Wellington Car House in December of 1979. These cars are constructed from a steel-wedged structure of low alloy, high tensile steel, which includes the entire underframe, body structure, and side end and roof sheets. These cars are 65 feet long, 9 feet 3 inches wide, 11 feet and 11 3 4 inches tall. These cars weighed 66,330 pounds. These ran total of 65 miles per hour, had 2.5 miles of nominal acceleration, 2.75 miles of full service braking, and 3.25 of emergency braking. These cars had air compression control systems which make this noise when these deboard and arrive a station. So let's hear it out, shall we? These cars had 58 leather cushioned seats with wood paneling walling for the interior. Now these cars came in a very interesting shape as a shape of an octagon. These cars were schemed bright orange blossom on the bottom half, white on the top half, and a gray silver roof. Now, there were a total of 120 cars purchased, numbered 01200 to 01319, in which these cars are known as the 1200 series or number 12 mainline. Now, these cars were also nicknamed the Orange Blossoms because these did look like orange blossoms as they were brand new in the 80s era. The first run was made on the 1200s on February 9th of 1981. The 1100 series made its last trip on November 9 of 1981. After its retirement, several units were held for maintenance purposes, such as for the Southwest Corridor. Also, several units got transferred to Cabot Yard, which is the maintenance yard of the Red Line, in which the 1100 series would serve the Red Line for maintenance purposes until all later being scrapped in 1987. Cars numbered 01178 and 01179 got preserved to the Seashore Trolley Museum in Kingbunkport, Maine in 1991. Now the T system seemed rolling fine until the 2010s when the T began to show very huge problems with the aging 1200 series. These cars suffered from rusting majority of the time, which making it ruining its look. Also, these cars have suffered mechanical and electrical problems many times, and the major issue with these cars was the traction problem. Now, when these cars ran in the snow, especially on the Southwest Corridor, these cars had snow piling up on its wheels, which led to many failures, as we know. The traction motor is a motor which properly controls the train and keeps it running. It is responsible for making the train move forward, compel backwards, stopping and braking, also for doors opening and closing. Now, if the traction motor fails to work, this can lead to the whole train malfunctioning. Now, Hawker Siddeley Canada designed this motor only above 3 inches above tracks, which isn't enough space. The traction motor requires proper space, air, and moist to properly function. Now, with snow piling up caused a huge problem, in which this case the T had to replace the older cars. The T later held a bid of who would construct the new Orange Line cars, so with this the companies who participated were Bombardier, Hyundai Rotem, CRRC, which is a new company in Beijing, China, and Kawasaki. So with this, a $566.6 million contract was awarded to CNR, which became part of CRRC in 2014. So with this, the T ordered 152 cars, which will be numbered 1400 to 1551, which are expected to replace the old cars by 2023. After doing some prototyping, and this is what they have got. The new cars are constructed from a stainless steel modern body, which prevented rusting and erosion. These cars come with an all-new traction motor and design with Melco electrical, which makes it more quieter. These cars have 3 pairs of enlarged embodied doors, in which this helped people with wheelchair easily enter. These cars came with a signal tracker and a train tracker, in which these cars could track trains from miles away and could tell distance traveled. These cars were purchased in married couples, which I'll explain right now. Now, for example, car number 1400 has the operating cab, in which the driver will control the train, move it forward, move it backwards, open and close doors, while the second car, number 1401, would just be a single car with no operating cab and is required for 1400 to pull it for it to move. Now, these cars first arrived in Boston in 2018, in which cars number 1400 and 1401 was tested multiple times on the Orange Line test track from Community College to Wellington, as to see it properly functions and works. So with this, on February of 2019, the first run on the new Orange Line cars was made to passengers. The cars which had the operating cabs were called the ANs, and the cars which did not were called the BNs. For the interior, these cars had nice cool air conditioning with 41 orange plastic seats for the ANs and 44 seats for the BNs. These cars had space for wheelchair and screen monitors, which showed the connections the Orange Line made with. Now, CRRC later opened a factory in Springfield, Massachusetts, in which China would construct the shells and Springfield would assemble them. Now, in 2020, when the pandemic came, stuff kind of went on a different direction, in which the deliveries were delayed, and also on March of 2021, cars number 1400, 1401, and other units derailed at Wellington carrying 100 passengers. 1400 and 1401 still remains out of service to this day. Now, the CRRCs were placed out of service for a whole year, until these were later returned back to service in 2022. Now, as the months pass on, more cars were delivered. Cars number 1450 and 1451 had a battery explosion, in which was later repaired and is now back in service. In July of 2022, a train set caught on fire at the bridge between Wellington and Assembly, in which this created a bit of hassle and a lot of incidents. And with this, the Orange Line became unsafe for the public. The T later planned to shut down the Orange Line for a whole month, as for repairs, upgradations, and track replacement. On August 19, 2022, Hawker Siddeley 01226, 01227, 01286, 01287, 01318, and 01319 making its last southbound trip from Oak Grove to Forest Hills, also being the last time of the Hawker Siddeley 1200s ever making a passenger trip. With this, the Orange Line was shut down for 30 days, and with this, construction began on the Orange Line and shuttle buses replaced service between Oak Grove and Forest Hills from August 19 through September 18. On September 8, 2022, units 01238 and 01239 were loaded on flatbed trucks taken away by Costello Dismantling to Middleborough Scrapyard. A total of 20 cars were taken away by September 22, and a total of 72 cars were taken away by February 2023, leaving 48 cars at Wellington and Forest Hills layover. A total of 72 of the new Orange Line cars were placed into service. In December of 2022, 9 of the CRRCs were placed out of service, and in January 2023, 15 of the CRRCs were placed out of service because after an inspection, they found that these cars had broken cables and axle problems. These were later repaired and returned back to service, except for 1400 and 1401 still being out of service to this day. As of April 2024, 116 of the CRRCs delivered and 106 active. For the 1200s, scrapping has begun, and as Costello removing cars per week as time flies. As of now, 32 of the 1200 series are left at property at Wellington Yard. Now let's hope a pair or two gets preserved before they all get turned into nothing but this.